But under the faded blue umbrella of Stephanie's pot, a different, more benevolent heat thrived. It was the aromatic, soul-warming heat of a perfectly simmered stew. The air in Ojuelegba throbbed with a life of its own, a symphony of blaring danfo horns, the spirited cries of hawkers, and the sizzle of oil from a dozen different food stalls. It was a chaotic ballet of survival, and Stephanie was its graceful, unwavering lead. Her stall was simple, a few plastic tables and chairs, a line of large, blackened pots resting on tripod stands over dancing gas flames. But from those pots came magic. There was the vibrant orange of her jollof rice, each grain infused with the spirit of tomatoes and peppers. There were the golden, caramelized chunks of fried plantain, and the deep, dark allure of her signature dish, a rich, complex stew she called obe ao, the soup of joy. It was her grandmother's recipe, a secret alchemy of spices, love, and a mysterious leaf that grew only in her native village. This stew didn't just fill stomachs, it mended heavy hearts and lightened weary spirits. It was the reason her stall was always buzzing, a small oasis of community in the harsh city. Stephanie, a woman in her late 20s, moved with an economy of motion born of years of practice. Her smile, though often tired, was genuine and reached her warm, brown eyes. She wore a simple, clean apron over her Ankara print dress, her hair neatly covered with a matching scarf. She never knew that this simple, honest work, the work of feeding people, would one day plunge her into a world of danger, betrayal, and a mystery that would challenge everything she believed about kindness. Her day had a rhythm, a liturgy of service, and its most sacred ritual occurred at 2 p.m. That was when Austin would arrive. Austin was a fixture of the Ojuelegba landscape. He was a crippled man, probably in his early 40s, though hardship had carved lines on his face that suggested more years. He navigated the treacherous sidewalk on a small, wooden platform fitted with 4 rusty wheels, propelling himself forward with powerful, calloused hands. His legs, twisted and useless, were tucked beneath him. His clothes were perpetually worn thin and dusty, but he carried himself with a quiet, unbroken dignity. He never begged. He would simply wheel himself to the periphery of Stephanie's stall and wait, his eyes, a startlingly clear and intelligent light brown, patiently watching the world go by. And every day, without fanfare, Stephanie would fill a takeaway pack to bursting. A generous mound of jollof rice, a piece of fried fish, a serving of her famous stew, and 2 fat chunks of plantain. She would walk over and hand it to him. "God bless you, Mama A.O.," he would say, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, using the nickname her grateful customers had given her. "It is nothing, Austin." "Go well, oh," she would reply, her smile softening the edges of her own fatigue. This exchange was as reliable as the sunrise. For 3 years, it had never faltered, not even during the worst rains or the most sweltering heat. It was a thread in the fabric of her life. "Stephanie, I don't know why you bother yourself," her friend Chichi would often say from her adjacent stall, her voice sharp as a new knife. Chichi sold Accra and Moin Moin, and her business was good, but it lacked the legendary status of Stephanie's pot. "That man, his head is correct. He can use his hands to do something. You are just encouraging laziness." Stephanie would simply shake her head, wiping sweat from her brow. "Chichi, we are all just one bad day away from needing help. My mother always said, the hand that gives never lacks. This small thing I do, it is for my own blessing too." Chichi would snort, turning back to her own customers, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Lately, that flicker had grown into a steady glow of resentment. Stephanie's kindness, her success, her unwavering goodness, it all seemed to highlight a lack in Chi-Chi's own life. This quiet, simmering envy was a believable villainy, one born not of grand evil, but of the daily grind and the painful comparisons it fostered. Then, one Tuesday, the rhythm broke. The clock ticked past 2 p.m. The usual lunch rush had subsided. Stephanie found her eyes constantly darting towards a spot where Austin always waited. The space remained empty. A faint prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. "Maybe the sun is too much for him today," she mumbled, stirring her pot of stew. By 4 p.m., the unease had solidified into a hard knot of worry in her stomach. Austin had never been this late. She asked Kola, the quick-witted Okada rider, who was her regular source of gossip and groundnut supplies. "Kola, you see Austin today?" "No, Mama Ao." "I no see him at all," Kola replied, his brow furrowed. "Maybe him day sick." But the next day, the void remained, and the day after that. A whole week crawled by, each day stretching longer and emptier without the familiar sight of a man on the wheeled platform. Stephanie's worry bloomed into a cold, gnawing fear. She asked the newspaper vendors, the area boys collecting their unofficial tolls, even the stern-faced policewoman who occasionally bought suya. No one had seen him. It was as if the bustling, unforgiving city had simply opened a crack and swallowed Austin whole. Her small, daily act of charity, a cornerstone of her own happiness, had vanished, leaving behind a silence that was louder than all the noise of Ojuelegba. It was in this void of Austin's absence that the first real problem, sharp and menacing, arrived. A week after his disappearance, a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows, a vehicle so alien and imposing it seemed to suck the sound from the air, pulled up in front of her stall. The purr of its engine was a threat. The doors opened and two men emerged. They were bulky, dressed in dark suits that were utterly impractical for the Lagos heat, their eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. The leader had a thin, pale scar that ran from his temple to the corner of his mouth, pulling his expression into a permanent sneer. People would later whisper his name, Scarface. He walked towards her stall, his polished shoes clicking on the broken pavement. The usual chatter of the market died an instant death. "You are the woman they call Mama Ao." His voice was flat, devoid of any human warmth. Stephanie's heart hammered against her ribs. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron. "Yes, I am Stephanie. My Oga has heard of your food. He wants you to cook for him. Exclusively. You will close this stall and come with us to his residence in Ikoyi. The pay will be 5 times what you make here in a month." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was an offer that sounded like a fairy tale, but the delivery was all wrong. It wasn't an offer, it was a summons. The cold finality in his tone made her blood run cold. Stephanie looked around at her regular customers, at Mama Nkechi, who sold fabrics next door and always watched her stall when she needed to use the restroom, at the very pots her grandmother had used. This wasn't just a business. It was her identity, her community, her inheritance. I thank your Oga for the offer," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But I cannot accept. My place is here. My people are here." Scarface took a step closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his strong cologne mixed unpleasantly with the aroma of her stew. "Woman, you are not hearing me. This is not a discussion. It is an instruction. Pack your things. Now." A fierce protectiveness rose within Stephanie. "No. The answer is no." The man stared at her for a long, terrifying moment, his expression unreadable behind the glasses. Then a slow, cruel smirk spread across his lips, twisting the scar. "Foolish woman, you have just thrown sand into your own Gary. You will regret this." He turned on his heel, and he and his companion slid back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy, suffocating dread in its wake. The problems, she soon discovered, had only just begun. The very next day, the Lagos State Task Force on Illegal Street Trading, in a display of brutal efficiency, descended specifically on her stall. They were unnervingly precise. They ignored Chi-Chi's stall, they bypassed the people selling contraband DVDs, they marched straight to Stephanie's pot. "You are operating an illegal structure," the leader barked, though her stall was identical to every other one on the street. They confiscated her pots, her gas cylinders, her plastic chairs and tables. They slapped her with a fine, so enormous it made her dizzy. It was a targeted, malicious attack. Stephanie knew it. Everyone knew it. But who could she report? She didn't even know the name of the faceless Oga she had offended. Tears of frustration streamed down her face as she watched them haul her livelihood away. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mama Nkechi. "My daughter, be strong," the older woman said, her voice soft. "This life is a battlefield." Using almost all her life savings, Stephanie paid the fine and bought new pots and equipment. A week later, she was back in business, but her spirit was badly bruised. The joy she once felt when she lifted the lid from her pot of Obe Ao was gone, replaced by a constant, low-level anxiety. But the richest, most painful poison often comes from those closest to you. The story of her refusing a rich man's offer had spread, twisted and distorted by envy and fear. Her customers, scared of the task force, started avoiding her stall. The lively crowd thinned to a trickle. The vibrant oasis began to wither. The final, crushing blow came from Chi-Chi. One evening, as Stephanie was listlessly packing her few remaining items, Chi-Chi walked over. Her arms were crossed, her expression a mask of cold disapproval. "Stephanie, see your life," Chi-Chi began, her voice dripping with a venom that was years in the making. "Look at what your stubbornness has caused. Because of you, this whole area is now on the government's radar. These big men, you don't have a personal fight with them. Look at you now. Your business is dead. For what? For pride? Or for that useless cripple man, Wei Yude give food? The one who has probably died like a dog in a gutter somewhere." The words were like physical blows. Stephanie staggered back, her hand flying to her chest. "Chi-Chi, how can you? He was a human being. We were friends." "Friends?" Chi-Chi let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it? You think you are better than all of us because you could afford to throw food at a beggar? You and your soup of joy. Your joy has now turned to sorrow. That man and his bad luck have infected you. I cannot stand here and watch you destroy yourself and scatter my own business with your problems. From today, you and I are no longer friends. Do not call me for anything. We are done." Stephanie stood frozen, watching as Chi-Chi turned and walked back to her own stall, where a few late customers still lingered. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it felt like the ground had been ripped from under her feet. The person she had shared laughter, secrets, and dreams of a better future with had just walked away, leaving her alone in the deepening shadows. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Stephanie's life. Her stall was a ghost of its former self. The few customers who came did so furtively, out of pity. The pot of obeao often remained half full, its joyous aroma now a bitter reminder of all she had lost. She was isolated, betrayed, and haunted by the twin mysteries of Austin's disappearance and the identity of the vengeful Olga. Was Chi-Chi right? Had her kindness been a curse? Had she, in her naivety, attracted a darkness she couldn't comprehend? She was on the verge of giving up, of packing her few remaining pots and returning to her village in defeat. The weight of the problems she never knew she would face for simply selling food was crushing the very life out of her. Then, on a day that dawned as gray and hopeless as all the others, everything changed. It began as a low, distant rumble, a vibration that grew steadily louder, synchronized and powerful, until it overwhelmed the familiar chaos of Ojulegba. It was the sound of raw, unadulterated power. People stopped in their tracks, their heads turning in unison. One by one, a convoy of 10 sleek, identical black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagons glided down the narrow street. They were behemoths of wealth, moving with a slow, deliberate authority that commanded silence and fear. Okada riders cut their engines. Hawkers stopped their cries. Children were pulled closer. The entire scene was frozen in a tableau of awe and apprehension. The convoy slowed, and with impossible precision, parked in a perfect, intimidating line directly in front of Stephanie's dilapidated, lonely food stall. The world was holding its breath. The doors of the lead car opened. A driver, immaculate in a white uniform with gold epaulets, jumped out and opened the rear passenger door with a deep, respectful bow. And then a man stepped out. He was tall and stood with an innate authority. He was dressed in a breathtakingly beautiful agbada of the finest white brocade, embroidered with intricate gold thread. A simple but heavy gold chain rested on his chest. He held a walking stick made of gleaming, dark ebony, more a symbol of status than a need for support. A gold wristwatch glittered on his wrist, catching the sun and throwing dazzling spots of light onto the dusty ground. But it was his face that made Stephanie's heart stop dead in her chest, then restart with a painful, thunderous lurch. The confident, straight-back posture, the strong, clean-shaven jaw, the clear, intelligent light brown eyes that now held a piercing, unassailable power. It was him. It was Austin. But this was not the crippled, silent, hungry Austin she had known for 3 years. This was a man who commanded the very air around him. A man of immense, untold wealth and influence. He walked towards her, his legs perfectly straight, strong and sure, his gaze locked on her stunned, disbelieving face. The entire world seemed to shrink and warp, the sounds muffled into a dull roar in her ears. The memories flashed through her mind like a frantic film reel. His daily gratitude, his mysterious disappearance, the threats from Scarface, the crushing fines, Chi-Chi's vicious betrayal, her own lonely despair. All of it collided in this single, impossible moment. He stopped in front of her rickety table, where a single, half-full pot of obe-ao sat, its once joyful scent now a poignant emblem of her struggle. The aroma of her grandmother's spices mingled with the expensive, foreign scent of his cologne. The silence was profound, broken only by the choked gasp of someone in the crowd. Stephanie saw, from the corner of her eye, Chi-Chi standing frozen, her mouth hanging open in a perfect circle of shock and dawning horror. Austin's eyes swept over her, taking in her worn apron, the empty tables, the visible struggle etched on her face. A profound sadness, a deep, aching regret, flickered in his powerful gaze. He looked back at her, his expression a complex, heartbreaking tapestry of gratitude, apology, and a fierce, protective determination. He opened his mouth to speak, and his voice, once a low, gravelly rumble, was now a deep, resonant, and authoritative baritone that carried across the silent street. "Mama Ao," he began, his voice thick with an emotion that threatened to break it.